Just south of the town of Newbury is a remarkable modern archaeological site, the former World War II and Cold War airbase of Greenham Common, Britain's Cold War country park.
Hello, welcome to Greenham Common near Newbury, West Berkshire, United Kingdom. If you're over 30 and British, chances are you'll have heard of this place. If you're not, you won't, and it'll all be new. 30 years ago, this was an American airbase, a site of Cold War intrigue and tension, of nuclear missiles and mass protest, and was infamous throughout the UK. 3 decades later, it's now a country park. There's a lot of history up here and a lot of things to see and learn about. So for the next 30 minutes, we're going to be taking a wander around Greenham Common, looking at its history and its landmarks. As a guide, if you want to come up here and visit, or simply just to catch up on your Second World War and Cold War history. So stay with me for half an hour while we tour Newbury's Cold War country park. Let's go.
For my non-UK viewers, Newbury is a small town 45 miles west of London, located in the county of West Berkshire. Today we are visiting the area of the country park of Greenham Common, situated southeast of the town of Newbury, on the southern outskirts of the town itself. Geographically, Greenham Common is a low, flat plateau overlooking the town of Newbury, about 1.5 miles from the town centre. Overflying the park by drone from west to east, you'll see that the park comprises of flat, open scrubland, with large areas of wildgrass and patches of thick gorse. The park is around 4 miles in length and about half a mile wide. Situated to the east and west of the park are mature deciduous woodlands. The park features several small ponds and a wetland. It is also circumnavigated by a purpose-built gravel perimeter track suitable for both walking and mountain biking, which is around 8 miles in total circumference. Before we start exploring the park properly, of course it's time for a quite long history lesson to find out how the park got here in the first place. The grass scrublands of the Greenham Plateau have been used to graze cattle since medieval times. By default, it became common land owned by the people and not by a landlord. Actually, as you can see from this 1900 era Victorian map, not much had changed in the previous 500 years. But things would change, and changed dramatically in 1939.
The responsibility lies on the shoulders of one man. By his latest act of naked aggression, Hitler has committed a crime not only against Poland, but against the whole human race.
After Britain's declaration of war with National Socialist Germany in September 1939, the country mobilised for total war. By the end of 1939, Greenham Common had been requisitioned for use as an army training area. But by 1940, a more pressing need for more military airfields was identified. And so, in May 1941, the Air Ministry finally took over the running of Greenham Common from Newbury Council. Very quickly thereafter, on Greenham Common Plateau, the Air Ministry rapidly constructed a military airfield that became known as RAF Greenham Common. Initially, this airfield was intended to accommodate British bomber aircraft. But the US entry into the war in late 1941 necessitated a change of strategic direction, and by 1943, the United Kingdom needed to accommodate many US Air Force's bomber aircraft. In March 1944, Greenham Air Station had its role changed yet again, now to accommodate troop transport aircraft in preparation for Operation Overlord, the Allied invasion of Europe. Concurrently, large formations of American paratroopers arrived in the Reading and Newbury areas. These were the 101st and 82nd US Airborne Divisions. Many were billeted in and around the region of Greenham Common, intended camps such as Hampstead Marshall and Lambourne. After weeks of delays and false starts, on the 5th of June 1944, General Dwight Eisenhower, the Supreme Allied Commander of Europe, and later US President, arrived at RAF Greenham Common to offer words of encouragement to the men of the 101st Airborne. As darkness descended that evening, they were airborne towards Europe and occupied France, and D-Day of Operation Overlord was underway. In the early hours of June 6, 1944, airborne forces captured many objectives around the D-Day beaches to facilitate the main amphibious landings at dawn. D-Day came at a very heavy cost, with over 10,000 Allied casualties and over 9,000 German. But as the Allies strengthened their position and began to push inland towards Germany, in July that year, the airborne divisions were rotated back to England to regroup and recuperate. They were not to be there long. In September 1944, with the end of World War II in sight, Allied forces launched one of the most daring and ambitious offensives of the war, Operation Market Garden. Devised by British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, this bold plan aimed to capture a series of key bridges across the Netherlands, providing a direct route into Germany and hastening the end of World War II. Market Garden remains the second largest airborne operation in military history. The plan was devised and executed within 7 days by Field Marshal Montgomery and involved over 1,500 aircraft taking off in waves from over 24 airfields in southern England, including RAF Greenham Common.
Is ready to take off from scores of fields to invade the Rhine Delta of the Netherlands. The forces participating in the largest assault of its kind are the U.S. 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions, veterans of the D-Day landings in Normandy, also the British 1st Airborne Division. The paratroopers are loaded into hundreds of C-47 transports. They were preceded by a vast fleet of bombers and fighters which softened up the Dutch invasion area.
Like D-Day before it, Market Garden came at a very heavy cost, particularly for the British 1st Airborne Division, and it's widely accepted now that the Allies tried to go a bridge too far. But Market Garden was 90% successful. In Hampstead Marshall, 4 miles away from Greenham Common in the present day, there is a memorial to US airborne forces who were camped there in 1944. On the 8th of May 1945, with Adolf Hitler dead, Germany surrendered, and World War II in Europe was over. To commemorate the United States servicemen who died liberating Europe, today there is a US War Memorial near the Greenham Common Control Tower. By 1946, with World War II over and most US forces returning home from England, RAF Greenham Common was more or less mothballed and deserted. However, that was not to last long, as by 1950 it was obvious to the world, having got rid of one genocidal expansionist dictator in the form of Adolf Hitler, another one, Joseph Stalin, was ready to take his place. And the Soviet Union, with its armed forces, became a serious threat to the peace and safety of post-war Europe, and thus began a conflict that became known as the Cold War. To assist in countering the threat from the Soviet Union in 1950, the US forces returned to RAF Greenham Common in significant numbers, transforming the once World War II airfield into a US Air Force strategic air base, one of several that would begin in the United Kingdom. In the late 50s and early 60s, the runway was lengthened and upgraded to be able to take strategic bombers and heavy lift aircraft. And then, throughout the 1960s, 1970s and 1980s, a large construction and development programme was underway to transform the airbase into a state-of-the-art strategic asset. Of course, in the year 2024, none of this exists anymore, and the airbase is now a country park. So where did all the Americans go? Well, I'll explain that later. But now I think it's enough history and it's time to get out and explore Greenham Common ourselves on foot. Present day Greenham Common Park has 3 main car parks, one in the centre, one to the west and one to the east of the park. So for our tour we're going to use each car park as a base and split the park up into 3 sectors to tour. Since we started the video at the US War Memorial, we'll start our tour from here using the centre car park. So in this part we're going to visit the control tower and then take a stroll out to the centre point of the former runway. My drone flight gives you a view over the control tower and main car park. The car park is free but with voluntary donations and with parking for around 200 cars. Greenham Common Control Tower was built in 1952 and this is how it looked when it was first commissioned. The old control tower today is a listed building and it has been extensively refurbished in recent years. Today it serves a purpose as a museum and a cafe. On the ground floor you will find a coffee shop and public toilets. The middle floor is a small museum and on the top floor is an observation deck, which I'll show you now.
Because you had obviously the main runway during the Cold War, and then you had the cross north and south runways and the aircraft aprons that went right off up to Pigeons Farm. Yeah. But obviously the Gamma site's fairly modern. So this is the Greenham Common Control Tower above the observation deck, built in the late or early 1950s actually, when the base was resurrected. Fantastic view of the whole of Greenham Common, right out to Gallows Down to the south, and the Gamma site we'll look at in a bit. I'll just take a quick tour around now. The entry is free, but there's a voluntary donation up here. You can pay by contactless card, about £3–4, whatever you want to pay, really. It's worth it to come up here and actually see the view on a good day. Let's have a look at what you can actually see from out the windows. So we're outside now looking at one of the dew ponds near the control tower. Just remember the tower is visible through most of the park, so if you get lost, just head towards the tower to get your bearings. Something you'll see regularly as you walk around the common are these fire hydrants. If you look closely, they're United States fire hydrants. This one dates from 1986. This is because the US Air Force fire equipment all had US fittings and couldn't use British hydrants. We're now on the main perimeter track, and as you can see it's really busy with families and dog walkers already, and we're now heading towards the centre of the runway. Well, this is the centre of Greenham Common. In fact, it's the centre of the old US runway. And for some reason, the runway tarmac and concrete are all still here. Asked one of the park wardens why it was, and even he doesn't know. But it's a good reference point to explore the rest of the park. So let's look at the aerial view from here. Okay, that's us done with the centre part of Greenham Common. I'm off now back to the car park to pick up my car. But as you head back, you'll notice these things fixed to the concrete. They're the old runway and marshalling lights.
Right, having collected the car, we're now going to take a quick drive to the west end of the park, which is about a mile away, and park in the Blue Gate car park. From there, we're going to get out on foot and we're going to visit the Gamma site, the fire plane, and then take a trip to the business park for a coffee. Be warned, the Blue Gate car park is quite small, and as it's the closest to urban Newbury, it gets very busy very early. If you find it hard to park here, then about 300 metres away you can find on-street parking. So this is the original airbase Blue Gate, and it's now about a 50-minute walk to the Gamma site from here.
Located in the southwest corner of Greenham Common is the jewel in the crown of the park, from a Cold War point of view. It's the old Gamma site, still fenced and now declared a Scheduled Ancient Monument. If you're under 30, it's probably a bunch of boring old mounds to you. So it's probably worth refreshing how scary it was to be around in the late 70s and early 80s, and the ominous nature of this location.
The global nuclear war threat escalated considerably throughout the late 1970s, and so did public anxiety, not helped by the government issuing of the creepy Protect and Survive Civil Defence Information Programme in 1980. Unfortunately, I can't show you video clips of these, as the BBC and Frankie Goes to Hollywood have the copyright on YouTube. 1983 has been called by historians as the closest the world came to a nuclear exchange between NATO and the USSR since the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1961. Even Hollywood got in on the act with the teen nuclear war thriller War Games. Ironically, the scenario of the movie was played out for real just months later, when the USSR came within minutes of an erroneous nuclear strike during the now infamous Able Archer incident. You only have to watch the evening news in the early 1980s to get a feeling for the sense of nuclear paranoia that we had back then.
President Brezhnev warned that Russia will make crushing retaliatory strikes against any aggressor. The Soviet leader was speaking at the traditional celebrations of the anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917. Western diplomats stayed away from Red Square for the third year running in protest at the Soviet intervention in Afghanistan. Our Moscow correspondent John Osman reports.
Mr. Brezhnev stood on top of Lenin's tomb for 2 hours on a cold, snowy but sunny day. And afterwards, at the Kremlin reception, he warned foreign ambassadors, among others, that if any potential aggressor tried to strike at the Soviet Union, then the Russians would deliver a crushing retaliation. While paying lip service to peace, contrasted oddly with the procession of Soviet rockets, missiles, T-72 tanks, and other armour and artillery as they were paraded through Red Square.
Just 3 days after appearing at this parade, Soviet Premier Leonid Brezhnev was dead. Brezhnev was a hardliner who had served under both Stalin and Khrushchev. His death in November 1982 sparked a power struggle within the Kremlin between reformers and hardliners. Between 1979 and 1980, in an escalation of the arms race, Brezhnev had deployed Soviet SS-20 mobile missile launchers into Soviet-controlled Eastern Europe. Of course, now a museum piece, but back then the SS-20 was an intermediate-range nuclear missile launched from a mobile platform that carried a 1 megaton warhead, theoretically able to hit any target in the UK when launched from Poland or East Germany. In direct retaliation to the deployment of Soviet SS-20s, in 1982, NATO announced the deployment of intermediate-range nuclear cruise missiles in Western Europe. And in the UK, these will be based at 2 sites, Molesworth in Cambridgeshire and RAF Greenham Common.
Greenham Common Air Base, Berkshire. The underground silos where all the missiles will eventually be stored. 96 here and 64 at the other chosen airbase, Molesworth. The first batch of 16 is already here. But
the US BGM-109G Griffin system was a subsonic ground-launched cruise missile with a range of 1,600 miles. Each missile carried a 400-kiloton nuclear warhead. It was deployed from a truck-towed transporter launcher that carried 4 missiles.
Cruise missiles based in Britain would have no difficulty reaching their targets in Eastern Europe and Russia, but they would take a long time to get there, 3 hours, while the faster Pershing II missiles stationed in West Germany could get there in 10 minutes.
To house the missile system, in 1982 and into 1983, the old World War II ammunition dump at Greenham was levelled, and a nuclear-hardened, high-security, ground-launched cruise missile alert and maintenance area, or Gamma site, was constructed, costing over $1 billion in today's money. The completed site comprised of 6 hardened hangars for cruise missile launchers able to withstand a direct air assault and a nuclear airburst. Also a warhead maintenance and transition area, and also high security infrastructure. On the 14th of November 1983, the first missiles arrived at RAF Greenham Common, and the cruise missile system went live soon after. This escalation of nuclear tension with the Soviet Union did not go down well with the British public. The cruise missiles' tenure at Greenham Common was short indeed, as world events overtook military planning. In 1985, a reformist premier, Mikhail Gorbachev, was elected head of the Soviet Union. His intention from the start was to end the Cold War. And in 1987, both he and the US President at the time, Ronald Reagan, signed the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, agreeing to withdraw all intermediate nuclear weapons from Europe. In 1989, the cruise missiles started to leave Greenham, and by 1991, they were all gone. With the cruise missiles gone, the billion-dollar Gamma site became redundant. Today you will find it much as it was left in 1991. Too expensive to demolish, it has now been declared a scheduled ancient monument, to be preserved as a physical record of a very dangerous time in human history. The Gamma site is now leased by a car storage and reselling company. You can't visit internally and they have their own security. The Gamma site is part of Greenham Common Country Park, and you can visit it by walking around the perimeter fence. There are a number of footpaths and mountain bike tracks to follow. So what we'll do now is have a quick tour around the Gamma site looking at the footpaths. We're now approaching the Green Gate, the old military gates to the Gamma site. There is 24-hour security here provided by the car storage company if you need assistance. As we've discussed, Greenham Common featured prominently in the Second World War and also the Cold War. But there's one further war that Greenham was involved in, and one that might surprise you. And that's this one.
The dark side. A Jedi. They're real.
Obviously, much CGI and post-production has been added since, but Greenham Common was one of the locations for the filming of Star Wars Episode 7, and it features as the Resistance base on the planet of Dakar. Principal photography for Episode 7 took place in 2014, and for a number of months the film crew was at Greenham Common, with Lucasfilms taking over the entire Gamma site. The set was dressed with full-size props of TIE fighters and a section of the Millennium Falcon. The star actors spent a couple of weeks at Greenham, including the late, great Carrie Fisher and Harrison Ford. although I don't remember seeing Harrison Ford in UB Wetherspoons. Unfortunately, I can't show you the Millennium Falcon or a TIE Fighter. They're long since gone from the site. But what we can look at is the fire trading plane. So let's take a walk 500 metres to the west from here and look at the fire trader. My bad, we're heading east, not west. However, I'll walk and you can fly. The fire trading plane is a mock-up of a generic aircraft, constructed out of plate steel and designed so that it can be set on fire to train the airbase fire crews. It was installed in 1986 and made by a local company for a reported £15,000. Before we continue our tour of Greenham, it's time for our final history lesson and to explain where all the Americans went. In the late 1980s, Soviet Premier Mikhail Gorbachev, remember him, enacted reforms throughout the Soviet Union known in Russian as perestroika. In 1989, the Berlin Wall came down. But without Soviet totalitarian control, the Soviet Union began to fragment quickly. Gorbachev attempted to carry on his reforms, and in 1990 there was a summit between the then US President Bush, no not that one, and Gorbachev, where further nuclear arms reduction was agreed and the Cold War further de-escalated. But history was running out of control and Gorbachev's time was now numbered. By the end of the year, Soviet Socialist Republic after Soviet Socialist Republic declared independence from Moscow, until finally the Russian SSR itself voted to become an independent state. On the 25th of December 1991, the Soviet red flag was lowered for the last time from the Kremlin and replaced with the flag of the present-day Russian Federation. And on the 31st of December 1991, the Soviet Union was formally dissolved.
What did remove them was a political earthquake in the then Soviet Union and an historic nuclear weapons accord signed by the Soviets and the Americans in 1987, the so-called INF Treaty. Under it, both sides agreed to substantial reductions in nuclear weapons. The removal of cruise missiles from Europe was part of that deal. It was the beginning of the end of the Cold War.
The unexpected collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the 40-year Cold War saw immediate and dramatic defence spending cuts in NATO countries, a so-called peace dividend. With the last cruise missiles gone from Greenham Common in 1991, by 1992 the US Air Force withdrew completely from Greenham, handing the site back to the UK MOD in September 1992. The empty air base languished for a few years as a ghost town before it was decided that the base was surplus to UK defence requirements. In 1995, the air base was sold to developers to become an industrial estate and business park. The airfield, including the Gamma site, would be returned to the people of Newbury as a country park. In 1996, most of the runway concrete and asphalt was torn up and it was used as infill for the new Newbury bypass, the A34. In 2001, an Act of Parliament created Newbury Country Park as it is today. The former base, now a business park, isn't part of the country park, but it's still worth a visit. It's deceptively large. It will take you about 30 minutes to walk from one end to the other. There is only one pedestrian gate to the business park from the common, and that's located near the fireplane. From there, we are going to take a look at the Missile Command Centre, and then stop for a coffee at the base art gallery, and finally visit the Peace Gardens near the main entrance. This is a pedestrian gate from the common to the business park. It's open to the public during business hours, but do remember you're now leaving the park and entering private property. This building is the former Cruise Missile Command Centre. It's nuclear blast hardened and high security. Today, it's a secure data centre. Next to the Missile Command Centre, and looking a bit sorry for itself these days, is a peace sculpture by the artist Gudrun Nielsen. Changes is a sculpture commissioned in 2010 and constructed of scrap metal from the site and placed on plinths of concrete salvaged from the former runway. The 9 sections are intended to represent the change of Greenham from military base to peaceful country park. No, I don't see it either. A further 15 minutes walk on and you'll come across this building. The base, built in 2019, guess where they got that name from, is an art gallery and artist space funded by the Greenham Trust and Newbury Corn Exchange. It does have a fantastic coffee shop, and in summer months an outdoor terrace where you can enjoy your coffee and a bite to eat. But be warned, you'll share your space with semi-trailers trundling past you every 5 minutes. I'll place a link to the base in the information. After a pit stop for a coffee at the base, we're now finally at the main entrance to the business park, where you'll find the Peace Garden. This place looks very different now from 30 years ago and comes with a history all of its own.
Greenham Common, home of the cruise missile and of the protesters. According to them, the presence of crews could plunge us unwillingly into an American nuclear war. The missile launchers go out regularly on nighttime exercises.
Ultimately, thanks to the unexpected events in the Soviet Union in 1991, by 1992 the peace protesters had become as redundant as the Gamma site. Although hardcore tried to remain relevant and remain in place, realistically by 1993 they were all gone. The site of the principal peace camp is now a sculpture garden known as the Greenham Peace Gardens. It's worth a visit.
Located in a corner of the Peace Gardens is a memorial to Helen Thomas, who was the only fatality of the protest years. On the 5th of August 1989, aged 22, she was accidentally struck by a police vehicle very close to this spot. Whatever you think politically of the protesters, it's sad to see a 22-year-old die so young, and she would have been the same age as me had she lived now into 2021. We're going to leave the business park there at the main gate and head back towards Greenham Common. For the final part of our tour, we're going to visit the eastern end of Greenham, and this is the quiet part of the park, as it's the furthest away from the towns of Newbury and Thatcham, about 3 miles from each town. It's quite a long drive to get here to the Orange Gate car park. It will take you about 20 minutes. From there, we're going to walk around the wetlands and visit the aviation fuel reservoir. The Orange Gate car park is situated about 3 miles from Thatcham on the old Thornford Road, and it's in quite a remote location. Located next to the old Orange Gate is the last remaining underground aviation fuel reservoir. There used to be 12 of these at Greenham Air Base. With a concrete cap of 20 metres diameter and about 3 stories deep, these fuel reservoirs held the war reserve of aviation fuel. It's totally safe to walk on, and the pipe connections are still in place. Another YouTuber recently lowered a GoPro camera into the tank and found that it's about a quarter full of rainwater now. As I said, this part of the park is really quiet, being the furthest away from the 2 towns of Newbury and Thatcham. If you prefer peace and quiet away from the crowds that you'll find in the control tower or Blue Gate ends, then this part of the park is for you. You'll still encounter the odd jogger and dog walker occasionally. Much of this part of the park has been landscaped into a wild bird wetland and is a favourite haunt of bird watchers. As you loop round the Wild Bird Reserve, you'll come across the dog pond. This is a dew pond dedicated for dog walkers to let their dogs splash around in the water, and designed so the dogs don't disturb the wild birds in the reserve.
Well, here we are at the eastern end of Greenham Common, the old military Orange Gate, although very little of that remains these days. Well, that's the end of our tour. Hope you've enjoyed the past 30 minutes. Thanks for staying with me. If you're interested in the Cold War, after the credits I'll put up links to my other Cold War videos. Laters.